In the name of God, Creator, Christ, and Holy Comforter. Amen. Please be seated. The world is exhausting and chaotic and loud. With a full week of December already done and the holiday season ramping up, people are running everywhere. And stores are playing the same 10 to 15 pieces of holiday music at full volume. There's last-minute shopping trips and full overstimulation-induced meltdowns. The news cycle is a constant feed of horror and despair, where one has to actively search to find glimmers of hope. And through all that cacophony, a lone voice cries in the wilderness, "Prepare the way for the Lord." The first time I actually remember starting to process that text was when I heard Stephen Schwartz's Godspell for the first time as a child. The opening number is John the Baptist singing, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord. Prepare ye the way of the Lord." That is a sentiment echoed in so many Advent hymns, from "Prepare the Way, O Zion" to "On Jordan's Bank." It speaks to people waiting and yearning for some sign of hope, that things can change. We hear it too in so many stories, this eternal, universal hope that things will change, that the world as it is does not have to operate this way. This is not a new idea for humanity. If anything, we seem to wrestle with this time and again. We certainly hear about it in the Psalms, with the psalmist so often crying out to God for things to change, for help in healing harms done. The prophets, too, also speak to this, calling for change and proclaiming the hope that things can be different. In today's gospel, we hear about the prophet of John the Baptist in the historical context of the time, placing him clearly in a time of specific governors like Pontius Pilate and Herod, and chief priests like Annas and Caiaphas. John traveled the countryside, calling for people to be baptized to show that they were changing their hearts and lives and wanted God to forgive their sins, and proclaiming the Lord's coming. What I find myself drawn to most in this text right now is the echoing of what we've heard across several readings these past weeks. John says that every valley will be filled and every mountain and hill will be leveled. The crooked will be made straight and the rough places made smooth, directly echoing the words of the prophet Isaiah, a promise also echoed in today's reading from Baruch. There is this promise of making things level and bringing God's people into salvation and glory. Maybe, though, those valleys and mountains and hills, the crooked and the rough, maybe those are not necessarily literal. Maybe it isn't about the very topography of the earth shifting, but about our own spiritual selves, our internal lives, our connections to love, each other, and to God. And God, above all, would know how many things there are in the world that separate us from each other. It's so easy to choose sometimes to ignore the hard things in order to do what you want, or to listen to the voice in your mind that tells you that your worth is based on things like your job, the kind of car you drive, your weight. Sometimes we counter those thoughts, see them for the falsehoods they are, and remember our connection to the love of God and the universe through our very being and creation. While other times we rationalize or even accept those negative thoughts as true and inevitable, each adding another layer to the mountains, to the valleys, the crooked paths or rough places within our hearts that further separate us from being able to feel God's love offered to us. It's really hard to make choices that align with every belief or value we hold, especially in an increasingly fraught world. But we do not have to do it alone, nor do we have to be perfect in our every thought, word, or deed. Because the promise we make and renew in our baptismal covenant is that whatever we do, we will with God's help. We are human and fallible, and by God, we make mistakes. There is a reason the seam ripper and the pencil eraser exist. Sometimes we need to start over. When we stumble and fall, when we blame ourselves for things outside of our control, that's when those mountains and valleys seem at their most extreme. We can feel the enormity of life, and it frightens us. But that's why we have prayer, too. Paul reminds us of this in his letter to the Philippians, expressing both gratitude and hope in his prayers, but especially his prayers for love. Paul prays that your love might become even more and more rich with knowledge and all kinds of insight, so that you will be able to decide what really matters, and so you will be sincere and blameless on the day of Christ. I hear him praying for us, too, not just the Philippians. The love he prays for here is the love of discernment, of conscience, of listening to that still small voice that knows right from wrong and wrestles with ethical dilemmas and moral quandaries. We do not need to be perfect to be blameless. We just need to do the best we can, make amends when we mess up, and learn how to move forward, still honoring the pain we feel and the time we may need. This also allows us to build community and to reach out to each other when we need help, to support each other through the joys and the sorrows, and to find it within ourselves to be both more vulnerable and more human. How can we look to prepare our own hearts and minds in this Advent season? It is, after all, a season of waiting and reflection, of anticipation and excitement, but it's also one of acknowledging fear and uncertainty. In those moments, how can we listen more to God, to choose love and compassion, justice and accountability, and make ready for the coming of Christ? Amen.